where the priest and the Levite, the religious people, the ones who ought to care for, they turned and they intentionally ran to the other side, and they got away as quick as they could, and they passed by. The Samaritan, the language says, came face to face with this injured person lying in the street. Now, when you hear what the Samaritan did, and we just read it, so the Samaritan climbs down off of his donkey, he soothes this person, giving bandages and wine and oil to try to care for this hurt person, and picks the person up and puts the person on his donkey and brings this person to an inn and gives the innkeeper some money. But it also said here, and I want to go back to this if we can, in verse 33, then a despised Samaritan, so Jesus doesn't hold back, a despised Samaritan came along face to face, and when he saw the man, he felt what? He felt compassion. He felt compassion for him. And going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. And then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. Okay? Now, I don't know about you, but if I saw somebody who was lying on the street and they were hurt and everything, I might, on my best day, I might dial 911. Might dial 911 and have somebody come to help. And if it was a real emergency and I thought, man, this person's going to die and I might, maybe, put them in my car and drive them to the hospital. Okay? And I know that in the modern context, there are dangers to those things, and so not telling you that you ought to do that, but even on my best day, those are probably my responses. And I'll tell you what, if I did those things, I would go home and tell them, I would put it in next week's sermon. I would tell you guys about the story, and I would consider myself not to be the good, I would be the great Samaritan. I would be like the most awesome Samaritan because I did this good thing. But you and I both know, once the ambulance drove away, or if I took that person to the hospital, once we got through the emergency room doors, what would I do? I'd leave. I'd go back to my life, go back to the tasks that I had to perform. This man didn't do that. This man went to the inn and he actually cared for the man. He stayed there overnight and he cared for the man. He not only felt compassion, but he practiced compassion. And the kind of compassion he practiced was profound because it was considered compassion. And considered compassion, what we're talking about is, what does my neighbor actually need? And whatever my neighbor needs, I will do that. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. You see, sometimes we act compassionately, but we act with unconsidered compassion. See, we want to help, but we don't consider what is actually needed. And so there's a story of, there's a Puerto Rican man who wanted to do a good thing for Haiti. Do you remember when Haiti experienced all that devastation a while back? Haiti was completely devastated. And help me out, was it an earthquake or was it a tsunami? What would they have there? Earthquake, okay. Terrible earthquake. Haiti was just decimated. And so there was a Puerto Rican man who wanted to do a good thing. And he was a wealthy Puerto Rican man. He had a lot of money. And so here's what he did. He filled an entire barge with potato chips and grape juice. And he sent it to Haiti. Was that compassionate? Sure it was. Of course it was. But was it considered? I mean, is that really what the Haitian people needed? Did they need a barge that was filled with potato chips and grape juice? It was a kind thing, but it wasn't really what the people needed. In fact, it probably just took up space at the docks. And what we know about the story is that much of the food and drink ended up spoiling and being wasted because it wasn't really what the people in Haiti needed. As another example, do you know that in the last 50 years, over $1 trillion has been sent to Africa in aid. Over $1 trillion sent to Africa in aid. And yet most reports today show us that the African people are worse off today than they were 50 years ago. And so the world is recognizing that there's a problem. The world is trying to demonstrate compassion, but we're just sending money. We're just throwing money at a problem. And to be more specific, Several years back, the government in Darfur committed genocide on 300,000 of its own people and displaced 2 million others from their homes. And so a group of Americans did what Americans often do. They created a Facebook page, and they talked about the horrors of what was going on in Darfur. Now, one day after they created the page, 24 hours after the creation of this page, it already had 1 million likes. 1 million likes. But over time, researchers went back to look at what did we actually do, and they found that 99.8% of the people who liked the Facebook page or post or however that works, 99.8% of them did nothing. How does that work? You click a button, is it like, I like? Is that how it works? Okay, they clicked. Like it. Don't like enough to do anything. 99.8% did nothing. And so I wanted to give you these 3 points about considered compassion. When we talk about considered compassion, we're talking about asking what does somebody who is in need really need, and then that's what I'll do. I won't just come up with my own solution. I'll find out what they need, and that's the thing I'll do. And so there are 3 teaching points today when we talk about this considered compassion. One is that considered compassion listens. Okay? Considered compassion listens. If you want to help somebody, you have to listen to what their problem is. You know, Jesus demonstrates this for us. It's interesting that Jesus, oftentimes in Scripture, over and over and over, when he comes to somebody and he's about to help them, do you notice that he typically asks them a question? He typically asks, hey, what do you need? What is it that you would have me do for you? What do you want from me? And we've talked about this before in church. Jesus doesn't need to ask that question. Jesus knows. Jesus knows exactly what these people need, but he typically asks, and then he listens to their response before he does the great thing for them. There was a study done in Arizona on poverty. Okay? Study done on poverty in Arizona. And Arizona wanted to figure out what exactly contributes to all this poverty. Why are so many people living in poverty, specifically in its own state, but what is it that is leading to poverty and creating all these problems in Arizona with poverty? And so they found basically 3 things. They boiled the study down to 3 things. There are 3 factors that will really impact whether or not people live in poverty. So here are those 3 factors. One is that they graduate from high school. Okay? And by the way, if you do have your kids in here, if you didn't send them away, make sure they see this slide. That they graduate from high school. A second one is that they get married after age 20. See, Mom, I did it right. Wait until almost 30. That they get married after age 20. And the last one is that they wait to have kids until after they get married. And so what the research found was that if you do all 3 of these things, if you graduate from high school, get married after age 20, and wait to have kids until after you're married, you only have an 8% chance of living in poverty. Okay? Let's flip that. You have a 92% chance of not living in poverty. But this is amazing. What they found next is that if you violate just any one of these conditions, you have an 80% chance to live in poverty. 80% by just violating one of these things. And so sometimes when we think about how to help somebody, we have to look at what these people actually need. And so as we're talking about helping maybe people who are living in poverty, maybe what we ought to do is consider factors like the ones you just saw. So maybe instead of throwing money, by the way, I'm not suggesting that this is the answer or that's the answer, but maybe instead of just throwing money at a problem, maybe what we ought to do is to say, you know what, if you graduate from high school, you have a much better chance to get out of poverty. Let us help you get an education. Let us train you. Let us help you with that. And so there are plenty of solutions there, but to actually look at the problem, to listen to what's going on, and then act on that. Here's another part about considered compassion. Number 2, consider compassion in partners. Okay, in partners. One of the things that I really struggle with as a pastor is I know we're supposed to be doing good things for the community. I know that. I know that we should be feeding hungry people. I know that we should be helping homeless people to have warm, safe places where they can sleep and a place where they can take a shower and clean themselves up. I know that we should be helping people who lack skills to gain those skills so that they can have a good life. I know that we're supposed to do those things, but those of you who have known me for these couple of years, you know that I haven't figured out how to do it yet. A couple of years ago, we had a great idea with a great title, the 5,000. You guys remember the 5,000? My best idea ever. We were going to have our whole church was very generous, and we saw that last week. Last week when we talked about helping families who are going to be struggling through the holidays, every single family that was up for adoption was adopted. Sharon Gilgenberg, who's really helping to coordinate that effort, afterwards she said, "Rick, we have a problem." And I was like, "I know the problem is that people did not adopt." She said, "No, they adopted everybody." And so now next Sunday, what are we going to do? When people come in and say, "Hey, I'd like to help," what are we going to do? Well, fortunately, Sharon and Alex, they found some more families. So that's good. So if you're somebody who wants to help before you leave today, you can go into the Heritage Room after church, and you can still be a part of that effort to help. But somewhere in there I had a point. Oh, the 5,000. Okay, so the 5,000, we were going to do a good thing. We were going to feed hungry people. Because I came to know through my experience with our youth group, with our teens, because sometimes teens will tell you a little bit more than their parents will. I came to learn that there are a number of families in the Lincoln Way area who, when you look at the house, you're thinking, wow, they're doing great. I did not see a baby. Oh, okay, I was like, I did not see a baby. Okay. They're doing great. And then what I found out was from the teens, yeah, the house is great, but it's empty. There's no food in the cupboards. And because families are maybe ashamed, or they don't want the neighbors to know about their condition, that they're struggling to do everything they can do just to pay the rent, or just to pay their mortgage, then they're not eating. So 5,000. So we had our church bring in meals. We were ready to feed 100 people here at Grace Fellowship Church. We had scrambled eggs and fried eggs and English muffins and bacon and sausage, and it was going to be delicious, wonderful, home-cooked food. And we call it 5,000, this idea that Jesus fed 5,000, and so we could certainly feed 100. And so you all know the story, because, well, some of you don't if you're new. We came here that morning, we were ready to minister to people, and you know 0 showed up. Not one. Not one person. Was that compassionate? Of course it was. We were trying to do a good thing for people who were hungry. Not considered. Didn't really stop and think through and learn about some of the things that we should have. You know what? A better way to do that would probably have been to partner with an agency that feeds hungry people. You've heard people say, why reinvent the wheel? So we were trying to do something here, and I really had to examine my own motives. And part of my motivation was good. Part of it was to do a good thing. To do a good thing for people who had need. And part of it was to share the love of Christ with people. But part of it was so that grace would receive glory. That grace did something good. That grace did the good thing. And a more effective plan would have been to partner with an agency that already knows who the people are who are hungry, how to get the food to them, how to do it without embarrassing them. And so we probably should have partnered with another agency. But if we had done that, then of course the agency would get all the credit and not us. And so back to my central question, who gets the glory? And those of you who are thinking, shame on you, Rick, who always gets the glory? You're right. And so church, answer that question for me. Who should always receive the glory? Thank you. Not Grace, not Rick, not the people who cooked for the 5,000. The glory should go to God. And so we probably should have partnered with an agency. Here's a very practical example. Some of you may drive down I-80 and maybe you exit at LaGrange. If you're driving west on 80 and you exit at LaGrange to come out this direction, there's a guy who's out there often with a sign that says, hey, I need some help. You need some help. Perhaps instead of giving $1 to that guy, maybe a better idea would be to give $1 to an organization that has demonstrated that it can help poor people. Because my dollar in that man's hands can only go so far, but my dollar in the hands of an organization that has demonstrated that it can do good can go a whole lot farther. And they can do good work. And so the question we should ask ourselves, is there someone in our community who already does that? Notice that the Good Samaritan partnered with the innkeeper. He didn't just try to do it all himself, he partnered with the innkeeper. He took care of a man for one night, but then after that, he gave a couple of silver coins to the innkeeper, and he said, hey, listen, I'm going to be leaving, but care for this man. Do everything he needs. And by the way, if he needs more than what I can afford, I'll bring him more money. The next time I see you, I'll bring more. And so he partnered with the innkeeper. And so as we look at a video like the one we saw today, where we see these people in Syria, and by the way, it's all throughout the Middle East and in other parts of the world as well, when we see people like this, and we say, well, my goodness, what can I possibly do? How can I affect any change? Maybe we want to consider partnering with an organization like Voice of the Martyrs or one of the other ones that's out there that can actually affect change for the Christians who are being persecuted in these parts of the world. Okay, third teaching point is this. Consider compassion plans. Consider compassion plans. See, it thinks beyond the immediate. It thinks beyond just right here, right now. The Samaritan gave the innkeeper money. And by the way, the amount of money he gave was probably relative to about 3 weeks' earnings by today's standards. It would probably take us about 3 weeks to earn what the Samaritan gave to the innkeeper. And he said, hey, take this and take care of the man. Take this and take care of the man. And so we have to be asking ourselves, when we want to help somebody, and I know that Grace is a good church filled with good people who want to help people, but are we planning for the future? And here's what I mean by that. In Haiti, another example in Haiti here, 5% of the food in Haiti comes from local farmers. Only 5% of the food comes from local farmers. The other 95% of the food is brought into the country. Now, if we wanted to help people in Haiti, there are a lot of different ways to do it, but one of the ways that we might consider doing it is by partnering with an agency that already exists, and by the way, the agency does exist, and what it's doing, it's trying to change the way that the Haitians think of farming. And so here in our country, if we say farmer, most of us think, oh, farmer, salt of the earth, good, hard-working people, you know, the backbone of our country. We rely on the farmers. In Haiti, that's not true. A farmer in Haiti is despised and looked down upon. A farmer in Haiti is somebody who is sort of a social outcast. Oh my goodness, you don't want to be a farmer. And because of that, people in Haiti don't want to become farmers, and so they have very little food. Again, 5% of which is homegrown. And so maybe a way to help the people in Haiti would be to change the way that Haitians think about farmers. See, that's forward thinking. Instead of just saying, hey, we're going to send you a lunch today, if you can change the way that Haitians think about farming, and you can then go in and train farmers in Haiti to grow their own food, can you imagine the impact that something like that could have on the country? And I don't want to confuse people today and say, are you pitching that we're going to help people in Haiti? No, that's not what I'm pitching today. Or is it that we're going to go and help people in Syria? That's not what I'm pitching today. But what I am talking about today is that as Christians, all of us are called to love our neighbors. And how we love our neighbors is important. How we love our neighbors is important. And I know that, as I've said, many of us, we are trying to love our neighbors, but sometimes we're trying in ways that don't really demonstrate love, or that don't really help the people with the things that they need that help. Back to where we started today, when we talk about this election season and just some of the rhetoric, not just about the election, but just some of the rhetoric in the United States today. There's a quote that I want to read you from a guy named Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil is a futurist, and Ray said this. He said, people think that the world is getting worse. What's actually happening is that our information about what's wrong in the world is getting better. Leave that up for a minute. Could we let's just do a hand raise, and I'll put my hand up because I'll be the first one to acknowledge my own ignorance. How many of you have at some point recently felt like, yeah, the world's getting worse? Getting worse. And I'm not saying you're wrong. There's a lot of evidence. I'm not saying you're wrong. But if we just rest in that the world's getting worse and, it's going down the tubes, we can't just rest in that. We cannot rest in that. In fact, it could be possible that the world's not getting worse. It's just that the information is better and more readily accessible, and so we know about every bad thing. And that's why I go back to this point about the Good Samaritan. The story of the Good Samaritan is focused on the Samaritan. Remember we talked about at the beginning? It's not called the story of the bad robbers. It's not called the story of the uncaring priest. It's not focused on the negative. It's focused on the good thing. We turn on our news and we know that good news doesn't sell. And so we turn on the news and what we see is the negative, the bad, the stuff that just brings us down. It's in the newspapers, it's in social media. Everything is to drag us down. You look at Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Vine. I don't even know what half these things are, but I think those are like modern day tech, like social. Yeah? Don, you're laughing at me. It's not nice. Considered compassion, Don. People post a lot of things. But I want to remind all of us who are Christians in the church today that we are the light of the world. If you are a Christian, I want you to hear that again. If you are a Christian, you're a follower of Jesus Christ, we are the light of the world. Like candles shining light into the darkness, we are the beacons of hope in the world. Now, Jesus is the hope of the world, but his church is a beacon of the hope of the world. And as Christians, we've been given capital. And every time you post or tweet, you spend some of that capital. Now, it's easy to spend that capital by criticizing and pointing out all that's wrong, but our whole culture does that 24 hours a day. Amen? That's what people use social media for. And I know it's not the only thing, and social media can be good, but too often, people are just pointing out the bad and tearing down, and that's what's happening. But what if you used your capital, Christian? What if you used your capital to point out the good? To light the candle rather than curse the darkness. To point out acts of courage. What if we started to share those stories? What if we started to be the encouragers? What if we started to be beacons of hope? Could it be that part of our job as Christians is not just to make sure that the world knows what we're against, but when we see something that is good, we point to it and say, that's what we're for. That's what we're for. I invite the worship team to come up as we close here. We can look at everything that's going on around us and even Jesus' story. And we can focus on the victim. We can focus on the robbers. We can focus on those who just walked away and ask, where was God in that? And listen, if you've ever talked to somebody who's not a Christian, and I do that, try to tell them about Jesus, you've been asked that question. You've been asked the question with all the ugly